Story 1. My family does not support sending aid to Ukraine. They believe it is causing too much inflation and that we should not be involved in wars around the world. Story 2. As someone who opposed selling weapons that later were used against us, I do not think flooding any area with weaponry, especially in large quantities or in places where they are hard to track, is a good idea. I feel the same about sending weapons to Israel. For clarification, this is not the same as Afghanistan and the Mujahideen. Even in conventional state armies, weapons go missing all the time. Often they are sold for money or captured. Not to mention militia forces, as we saw in the early days of the Ukrainian defense, and mercenary forces that appear in desperate wars. Weapons are abandoned or lost for various reasons. Yes, I know the alternative may be worse. I am not a fan of Russia. I am saying we need to be extremely careful. Story 3. Unpopular opinion. I cannot give a shit about anything outside the United States when I have trouble paying my own bills each month and will likely be renting for the rest of my life. Story 4. All the money we spend on Ukraine and Israel should be spent on improving America. We have poor infrastructure, inadequate health care, a homelessness problem, a mental health crisis, and a failing education system. Fuck war. Story 5. Many people think we are sending pallets of cash to Ukraine, but they do not realize that $4 billion of aid is mainly tanks, planes, guns, bullets, and shells, and that the money remains here to pay for replacing those items from our stockpiles. Story 6. I do not support it because there is no exit strategy. If victory for Ukraine means taking back all of its territory, there will never be victory. Ukraine cannot defeat Russia in open warfare no matter how many weapons we supply. It is not in the realm of possibility. We know that, and we should be helping to negotiate peace terms that are actually achievable. Ukraine will have to accept that it has lost some land and will not get it back. Our diplomatic efforts should be focused on getting President Zelensky and President Putin to agree on a new border and end this conflict. But we are not doing that. Instead, we are delaying the inevitable and keeping the fighting going so that Northrop Grumman can make more billions in weapons sales to the government and our politicians can take kickbacks. We will continue until Ukraine's forces are worn down and its population is broken, at which point we will finally direct them to accept peace terms that will be substantially worse than those available if they negotiated now while they still have some fighting strength to support their demands. In short, the United States government is not doing Ukraine any favors. We are using Ukrainian lives to fuel a payday for the military-industrial complex. Story 7. I don't support proxy wars against Russia or in the Middle East. There are too many issues at home to be funding wars abroad. Story 8. The issue with Ukraine is that it comes at a time when the general United States populace is getting the short end of the stick. The government's transparency on the topic is not needed. The problem with all this instant news is that people take it at face value. $20 billion more were sent to Ukraine, but they cannot raise the federal minimum wage. Why do they agree on that but not on helping the average United States citizen? It's all optics. Moreover, President Biden has handled it poorly in his wording, and the question of what others can do with United States weapons is a mess. The United States really does need to clean up some of its own messes, and soon. Story 9. I just do not think the United States should be involved in a war when no one has declared war on us. Story 10. The United States of America has never truly cared about human rights in modern conflicts. Every time it has aided countries or militias, there was an ulterior motive, and 9 times out of 10 the region ended up worse than before. On a personal note, the Ukrainian military and parliament are entrenched with Nazi sympathizers. Story 11. I don't understand why liberals and Democrats find it so hard to believe there are people who do not want to support the war in Ukraine. Here are some easily seen reasons. 1. People are tired of being in conflicts across the globe that, on the surface, have nothing to do with the United States. It is a role reversal from 10 years ago. They are tired of being the world police and subsidizing Europe's national defense. They also fear escalation and being dragged into another war. It is easy for some people online to call it posturing when Russia says it has changed its nuclear use doctrine, but that is a frightening prospect for many. 2. They see tens of billions of dollars being sent to Ukraine while their dollar buys less each week. 3. To go along with the first 2 points, They see the United States giving large amounts of money while Ukraine's European neighbors provide a fraction of what the United States provides. They then see some Europeans online speaking negatively about the United States. Despite all this, they read news stories and headlines that portray President Zelensky as arrogant or ungrateful, saying he needs more and that the United States is not doing enough, while the average American struggles to pay rent. 5. Finally, on a smaller scale, they worry that money sent to Ukraine is being lost to corruption and money laundering. I am not saying any of this is true. This is just what I see. People read headlines and single news stories, so when they see another aid package for $300 million, they assume it is all cash or something similar. Story 12. I support aid but do not share the Reddit mindset that it is better to escalate the conflict and fight to the death than concede an inch of territory. It is very easy to quote Neville Chamberlain, mock Russia's warnings, and cheer on Ukrainians fighting and dying in the name of democracy from the safety of a developed country. Personally, I think that if there is a potential peace deal on the table, Ukrainian citizens should be able to vote on it when the time comes instead of being forced to fight and die. Story 13. Our tax dollars should not be used to fund endless wars unless we are defending ourselves. Story 14. I do not think we should cut them off, but my problem is that there seems to be no peace deal in sight. Zelensky and the Ukrainians keep saying that the only peace deal they will accept is one in which Russia leaves all the occupied land, but that will not happen. Russia has billions it can continue pouring in and millions of men it can send to the meat grinder, unlike Ukraine. Eventually Russia will win through attrition. They need to accept that any peace deal will probably involve Russia annexing Luhansk and Donbass with some security guarantees from the international community. Story 15. That war will never end and will likely expand. Story 16. We have Americans starving, a suicide epidemic, widespread homelessness, and many who cannot afford groceries or gas. Many people's homes were destroyed by hurricanes. Let's start taking care of our own people. Story 17. The United States is fucked domestically. From civil services to basic infrastructure, everything is falling apart across the nation, yet we can find billions and trillions of dollars to send across the globe. Story 18. We do not have the money. We are borrowing it. Likely much of the money is returning to line the pockets of United States politicians. Think of all the supporters of the war. Fucking World War III. Story 19. I'm fine with it. I've even given money to a Ukrainian friend who sends it to Ukraine. What I am not fine with is that we did not do nearly as much for our own people when the hurricanes hit. I would love for Ukraine to be free from Russia. I also think taxpayer money should go to Americans when they truly need it. Story 20. I am against it because there are many communities and people in the United States who could use the aid. Americans should come first and everyone else second. Story 21. What aid are we talking about? Food? Weapons? I am against sending weapons for a simple reason. It is a lose-lose situation. If we do not give them weapons, they will lose the war. If we do, they will still lose, but later. The longer it lasts, the more of them will die. My moral compass tells me sending weapons is morally incorrect. If someone truly wants to help, it means going to war on their behalf. Unfortunately, that would mean a large-scale conflict, as Russia is not backing down. In short, either let them lose faster or intervene and win it for them, even if that risks more. Sending weapons only prolongs the conflict and sends more of them to death in order to cause more Russian deaths later. It is not right. Story 22. In addition to the obvious fact that we have no social safety net, United States proxy wars always come back to bite us in the ass. Sure, let's fund the Mujahideen to beat the Soviets. What could go wrong? Story 23. I don't think we should be giving billions to any country until we begin to solve our own domestic issues. Story 24. To help rebuild the devastating damage caused by the fires in Hawaii, it would have cost $5 billion to fully rebuild houses, infrastructure, buildings, and land to the same or better condition. Instead, $6 billion was accidentally sent to help fund a war. The reason given is that Ukraine sits on trillions of dollars of minerals, and BlackRock and Vanguard have exclusive rights to rebuild once the fighting is done. It is the minerals that the United States is interested in, not helping the people. Ukraine is a gold mine with $12 trillion of minerals the West cannot afford to lose, said United States Senator Lindsey Graham. People are still displaced on the mainland United States from natural disasters, yet money is poured into another country, apparently with no financial gain to help its own people. Story 25. I am somewhat on the fence but largely lean toward not sending aid. Our government has been too involved in other countries' internal affairs over the past 80 years. I also believe we do a very poor job of taking care of our own. Until we eliminate poverty and inequality at home and can set a shining example by providing healthcare and well-being for our people, we should not attempt to change the course of other countries. I do see a need to protect oppressed people. If we are going to help Ukraine, we should either commit fully and fight the war ourselves or refrain from intervening. I do not see intervention as necessary. It could lead to World War III, and Russia reclaiming territory does not, in my view, threaten us or global security. Story 26. Although I am not from the United States and do not live there, my opinion may not matter. Taxpayers want fewer people experiencing homelessness, better education, safer streets, lower grocery prices, and good health care. Funding wars overseas will not help any of these. Story 27. Several reasons. 1. I do not want to fund the wholesale slaughter of a generation of Ukrainians and Russians. 2. At this point, there is no outcome in which Russia loses and Ukraine wins. Only the North Atlantic Treaty Organization could force Russia to withdraw, but that would start World War III and everyone would lose. 3. Russia faces a demographic collapse and economic decline. This is essentially their last chance to try to change their fate militarily. They feel backed into a corner and are willing to go further than we are. Nuclear weapons are not off the table. 4. Given that the war is at a stalemate and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will not start World War III, we are simply sending young men into a meat grinder for no strategic victory. 5. We are sending billions in aid we cannot afford, which drives inflation higher. I understand we are sending weapons and supplies rather than cash, and that the contracts are being fulfilled in the United States. The government is paying those contracts by increasing the money supply, which contributes to inflation. 6. We have enough problems at home. If we are going to spend that money anyway, we should at least spend it here on our people. Story 28. It is a burden on taxpayers. They are not a United States ally. It increases tensions with Russia beyond those we already face, and it is further interference where the United States is not needed. We are not the world police, and the federal government should stop treating it as such. Story 29. We keep sending our troops and supplies to other countries. When they return with post-traumatic stress disorder, we leave them on the streets and blame them for their problems. Why do we care more about helping others? Story 30. What if, now hold on to your seats, you are against war? The war could end. Don't feed the monster. Story 31. It is really not our responsibility. We are not the world police or a savior. We have far too many people in deep need here in our own country who should be a higher priority. Story 32. Pro-Ukrainian conservative. This would not be an issue if Europe took greater responsibility for its defense instead of depending on others. Countries like Poland recognize this and have significantly increased their military spending. Moreover, Vladimir Putin would likely think twice before engaging in reckless actions like those in Ukraine if the opposing force he feared were not stationed an ocean away. A strong, well-prepared European defense would be a direct and immediate deterrent, making such behavior far less likely. It is time for Europe to take charge of its own destiny. A strong, self-reliant European Union not only ensures its security, but also benefits the United States and contributes to global stability. By investing in defense and standing united, Europe can strengthen its position on the world stage and promote long-term peace. Story 33. The United States truly has no business in a war that is taking place across an entire continent and an ocean away. This does not only pertain to Ukraine. The country simply cannot afford to keep doing this. We will soon face our own economic collapse similar to what Venezuela experienced, and politicians do not care as long as their pockets are lined. Story 34. No more foreign wars. United States intervention is always a bad thing. Story 35. Prior to the invasion, wasn't the Ukrainian government full of corruption? I am not sure, but that is one of the reasons I thought we should stand back and let it run its course. Story 36. 1. It is not our problem. It is not worth a full-blown confrontation with Russia. If Ukraine had been in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it would be a different story. 2. We have sent more aid to Ukraine than we spent forgiving student loan debt. We do not give them cash, but the aid has value that could be sold for profit and used to benefit American citizens. Story 37. 1. I don't support United States foreign aid going to any country, especially for war or proxy war, when we have poverty-stricken people and communities all over the country that those billions could significantly help. If you want to send food, seeds, and similar supplies to help people who are starving in Africa, I'm all for it, but we should still prioritize our own first. Sending pallets of cash and military supplies is a different matter. 2. There is a lot of evidence that suggests the Ukrainian military are literal Nazis. No, I don't mean that they're conservatives or Republicans, I mean literally Nazis. 3. It's not our war. We shouldn't be involved. 4. We are not getting the whole truth about the conflict from the mainstream media. I trust a Taco Bell fart more than I trust the media to report anything accurately or truthfully. 5. It's war. Fuck war, and fuck all the pieces of shit that profit from it and the billions in cash and supplies that we're sending. Story 38. The United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization are doing what Russia was doing during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Story 39. We should not have backed a revolution in 2014. We should not have told them to break the Minsk Accord. We should not have tried to get Europe off Russian gas by routing a pipeline through Syria. We should not have blown up Nord Stream. We should not have scuttled the peace agreement that was reached in the first week. And no, we should not keep slaughtering Ukrainians in some feeble attempt to weaken Russia, a geopolitical foe that we created as our enemy. So no more weapons. It is time to end the war. Don't you think 1 million children are enough dead? Story 40. We should not fund wars in other countries when we have our own country to fix. That is why. Story 41. Personally, I am conflicted. I do not want Russia to steamroll through Ukraine without intervention, but I also do not want a country to act as the world's police. It costs enormous amounts of money, can destabilize entire regions, and can create problems for future generations. I am torn between isolationist policies and protecting the innocent. Both options carry huge risks, and it is nearly impossible to weigh every consequence. Story 42. I do not agree with sending money to any country until Americans are no longer struggling to make ends meet. Story 43. There are too many things in the United States that need funding. Number 1 is our school system. Story 44. I want a check like that. What about all of us who work? We deserve a substantial check from the government. Yeah, right. Story 45. We have enough third world problems at home without worrying about the rest of the world. Story 46. I do not have a problem with them sending weapons and aid to Ukraine. I have a big problem with them helping Israel commit genocide, especially when they lecture the rest of the world on morality. I believe this was a major reason why so many traditional Democratic voters did not vote for them this time. Story 47. Mississippi, California, Texas, Massachusetts, South Carolina, Ukraine, Alaska, and Michigan. One of these things does not belong here. Story 48. It is just supporting military manufacturers rather than the people of Ukraine. They are dying endlessly. This is terrible. Story 49. I think it shows the government's true colors rather than helping its own citizens in need, whether because of natural disasters, drug problems, inadequate infrastructure, homelessness, health issues, poor food quality, crime, or low wages. The government acted as if it had tried its best, but we can see firsthand how much money was hidden from the public billions. Story 50. Sending aid is one thing, but spending billions of taxpayer dollars that could be used to help our own citizens, rather than to boost Ukraine's economy, is concerning. $175 billion in taxpayer funds have gone to Ukraine in the last 4 years. The United States is facing a migrant crisis, a growing homelessness problem, and skyrocketing inflation. The money sent as foreign aid could be better used here in the United States. Story 51. While I support it, I can understand why some people do not. The problem is that the United States has a relatively bad track record of involving itself abroad in wars that should not have occurred, and in that regard I kind of agree. One of the most recent examples is Afghanistan, where in the end much money was spent for little benefit. Some believe the money sent to Ukraine could be used for other purposes, and they are not entirely wrong. However, it is money that Ukraine spends on United States and North Atlantic Treaty Organization equipment for its war effort. If anything, Ukraine is used as an excuse to feed the military-industrial complex. I suspect this concerns recent Chinese military growth, so that, should a war with China happen, the United States would not be caught off guard. I am not saying the United States is usually caught off guard, but after Pearl Harbor we were. People are quick to lower their guard when things appear calm in global politics, and other countries are quick to take advantage of that. Story 52. The United States' opposition to sending weapons to Ukraine is a head-scratcher. The country has an around-the-clock war economy and seemingly does not want to use it for anything other than bombing the Middle East. Especially the Republicans of all people. What on earth do they expect to do with all these stockpiled weapons? Wait for them to rust and be replaced? I'm just saying, what is the point of the world's largest military-industrial complex if you instantly panic when it is time to use it? Story 53. Why are we caring for people outside our country before caring for our own citizens? Story 54. Money from United States taxpayers should be spent on them first. Story 55. We should spend the same money trying to stop the war instead of funding it. That's why. Story 56. As someone who knows little about the topic, I feel that sending aid money only delays the inevitable. It seems like a second Cold War, where the West keeps sending money until Russia goes bankrupt. Story 57. I think war is outdated. We could resolve our issues by other means. It only sets both sides back. Story 58. Our country is suffering economically. It does not matter if that aid is in the budget. We could still use it to help ourselves. Story 59. An argument I have heard is that our interest is in prolonging the war, and that this aid pressures Ukraine to continue the fight rather than negotiate a solution. I have not read enough to say whether I agree, but this is the argument presented in the only book I have read on the topic, Medea Benjamin's War in Ukraine, Making Sense of a Senseless Conflict. Story 61. We have enough issues at home. There are children starving in the United States. We do not take care of our veterans the way they deserve. People earning slightly more than minimum wage should still qualify for free healthcare. 2. We send too much money to too many countries. Aid to Israel should be cut off entirely. 3. It is time to stop acting as the world's police and involving ourselves in every major conflict. Story 61. Sending aid to Ukraine while sending bombs to Palestine and supporting Israel. Story 62. Because it is not the United States. Donate your own money if you wish, not mine. Story 63. I want Ukrainians to be safe. I just do not think we should set a precedent that every time a war breaks out, Western countries will put their hands in their pockets and fund that war. Story 64. Coming from a neutral country, humanitarian aid is fine. Food, clothes, shelter or tents, or even coming here as a refugee. But fuck all virtue signaling. I befriended people in Russia through gaming years ago, and sanctions only affect the lower and middle classes there as well as here. We suffer. They suffer. I mean, what the fuck is the point if my friend cannot buy Diablo 4 on Steam or buy skins? You all realize they can just bypass that or outright ask me to gift them items for games. And most companies stayed in Russia regardless. That is, Red Bull does not even care, Coca-Cola, Milka, Zara, Apple, and so on. As for me, I recently saw in the news a projected 25% rise in gas prices for 2025. If it's true, I'm cooked. Story 65. It escalates conflicts. That is how World War I and World War II became so large. Original belligerents requested aid, and Allied commitments caused the fighting to spread to other countries. I support giving to charity and helping injured civilians, but sending weapons and money to Ukraine risks drawing us into a direct confrontation with Russia. Story 66. I oppose financially supporting any wars except to defend the nation's territory or to fulfill treaty-based contractual obligations to protect allies. I oppose supporting the war in Ukraine not because I want Ukraine to be overtaken by Russia, but because it is a costly, ineffective half measure. If the purpose of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is to protect the West from the expansion of Russian influence and from Russian aggression, we should admit Ukraine to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, unilaterally commit to its defense, and demand the withdrawal of Russian forces. Story 67. I think sending weapons does not create peace. It can be a bargaining chip, but it will not achieve peace. The Trump side of the argument is that one should negotiate peace rather than pursue killing. I don't care much either way because I'm not American, but that's how I see it. Story 68. I say we give them back the nuclear weapons that we took from them in the 1990s, instead of honoring the promise we made to defend their borders in exchange for their giving them up. Story 69. Because if the United States sends weapons to aid Ukraine and those weapons are used to attack Russia, the next step could be retaliatory attacks against the United States. Do you want a full-scale World War III? Story 70. Same reason I didn't support the invasion of Iraq. Fuck the military-industrial complex. Why are we spending billions on foreign wars when people are starving, homeless, and living paycheck to paycheck at home? Also, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they made a deal to unify Germany and not to extend the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's borders. They cheated on that, and the Russians let it go because those countries did not border them. The United States government then bombed Belgrade and forced a regime change of the former Ukrainian president because he wanted to stay neutral. He understood his country was a mix of ethnic Ukrainians and Russians. The United States later backed out of the ballistic missile treaty and started placing missiles closer and closer to Russia's border. Before this, Vladimir Putin was actually considering joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There is propaganda on both sides, including the United States and Ukraine, and I do not want some politician triggering nuclear war because they could not simply follow treaties we all agreed to. Story 71. Ukraine should negotiate. They are losing despite aid, and that aid only prolongs the war. Story 72. We cannot even spend money to support our own people, so why are we sending funds to foreign countries? I am tired of always worrying about another country's war when it does not affect us or our people. Story 73. The United States government was established to govern and protect its own citizens. I do not remember reading in the Constitution that the government is meant to aid and protect foreign citizens. The longer a war continues, the more people die. The United States should use its unmatched power to secure peace, not prolong the misery of war. It is hard to justify aid going to other countries when so many of our vital institutions lack needed funding, including veteran services, teachers, the Environmental Protection Agency, and infrastructure. The United States is falling behind other Western countries in many areas because of this overextension. Story 74. This is a great way to get a list of bots, trolls, and useful idiots. These comments are full of Russian propaganda. Story 75. Think about what $100 billion could have done for Americans living in poverty. Story 76. They prevented Black and African people from leaving when the war began and allowed white people to leave instead. They never cared what happened to them afterward. Story 77. With people here starving and homeless, perhaps we should direct a couple of those billions to our own people. I am not saying we should cut funding entirely, but a couple $1 billion would go a long way. Story 78. As someone whose family came from this area, I know that Ukraine was long part of the greater Russian Empire. It was not until the 1990s that American influence increased, and the Obama administration overthrew the government there a decade ago and installed a pro-American puppet government. This all stems from our continued push for Ukraine to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Russia has had very minimal effect on the global stage except for invading neighboring post-Soviet countries like Georgia. Story 79. I am thinking maybe we should not make the nuclear superpower more desperate. Story 80. Putin said his red line was Ukraine joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He warned that if we acted as though we were going to add Ukraine to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, he would attack. Yet we did move closer to that position. We also led a coup in 2014. If we meddle in too many things, we will become bogged down as a country. Not helping our own people while sending aid abroad is problematic. The country is deeply corrupt. You are known by the company you keep. Story 81. It's not a recent thing. It was planned during President Obama's administration and came to fruition when President Joe Biden later took office. President Trump's term delayed those plans, so there was not much conflict during that time. Ukraine had a reputation for corruption before the conflict. Sending aid to a country known for corruption is not a good idea. Despite all the aid it has received, Ukraine has struggled. It is now overly dependent on foreign aid or investment and appears to be prolonging the war for financial reasons. The outcome seemed clear from the start to those in the loop. The objective was never only Ukrainian territory. Territory was a bonus, but the advancement of the military-industrial complex and field testing of new arms, weapons, warfare, and tactics for profit. Politicians are often heavily invested in defense companies, and that is how some career politicians derive part of their wealth. This is how taxpayers' dollars are funneled into their pockets. Russia would not have acted against Ukraine if Ukraine had not threatened Russia's national security, and Russia would not have supplied weapons to Israel's opponents if the United States had not sanctioned Russia, making Russia more reliant on others. I cannot in good conscience support the United States sending aid to Ukraine because United States meddling has a track record of causing conflicts that can escalate and of producing extensive suffering and loss of life. The United States should spend more on its own citizens. It is a first-world nation, but standards of living are second world or even third world in some places. Fix it. Story 82. I will focus on reasons the United States should not send money to Ukraine as a nation. Ukraine's historical ties to Russia. Ukraine has deep historical and cultural ties to Russia, particularly in its eastern regions. Russia regards Ukraine as within its historical sphere of influence and views Ukrainian attempts to join Western alliances as a threat to regional balance. Some see this as a continuation of centuries of shared history that the West is overlooking. Reports of corruption in Ukraine. Ukraine has consistently ranked poorly on global corruption indices. United States financial aid might not reach intended recipients and could be misused by corrupt officials. Violation of the Minsk agreements. Ukraine has been accused of failing to uphold commitments under the Minsk agreements, which aim to de-escalate the conflict in the Donbass region by granting limited autonomy to separatist territories. Critics say this breach exacerbated tensions and was used to justify Russian actions to protect Russian-speaking populations. Strategic importance of Ukraine to Russia, not the United States. Russia views Ukraine as critical to its national security and sees Western military aid as a direct threat. Conversely, Ukraine's security is not widely seen as vital to United States national interests, making heavy involvement questionable for American taxpayers. Alliances and far-right groups. Ukraine's military has faced criticism for tolerating or incorporating far-right nationalist groups such as the Azov Battalion. United States financial support risks enabling ideologies contrary to American democratic values. Economic strain on United States taxpayers. As the United States faces inflation, debt, and domestic challenges, billions spent on Ukraine could be redirected to domestic priorities such as infrastructure, education, or healthcare. North Atlantic Treaty Organization expansion and broken promises to Russia. Russia argues that expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization eastward, including the possibility of Ukraine joining, violated assurances given to the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War. Critics argue the West provoked Russia by encouraging Ukraine to pursue membership despite these tensions. Ukraine's uncertain future as a sovereign democracy. Given internal divisions and governance challenges, some argue Ukraine may struggle to maintain stability and independence even with United States aid. Prolonging the conflict might not lead to a viable democratic state. Risk of escalating global conflict. United States support for Ukraine increases the likelihood of direct confrontation with Russia, a nuclear-armed power. Critics argue that de-escalation and diplomatic solutions, rather than financial and military aid, are safer approaches to ensuring global stability. Story 83. Americans can barely afford groceries, and houses seem unobtainable, yet we are giving billions away instead of investing in our country. The country needs its money reinvested at home. Story 84. I am Russian. Recently, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin signed an updated nuclear doctrine. Check it out. The United States sends rockets to Ukraine that might be used against us, and we have the right to send a nuclear weapon their way. I do not want to be on the verge of an actual nuclear war right now. Story 85. As a non-American, I ask you, why do you feel entitled to intervene in conflicts around the world? You are not doing God's work. You are advancing a military and political agenda. Why should people be expected to support that? If the honest answer is that it preserves a status quo beneficial to America, I would understand. Otherwise, I have criticisms. Story 86. The United States cannot afford to be isolationist given our national debt. Until that debt is under control, if ever we need global influence, and the status of the United States dollar as a reserve currency requires us to intervene in international affairs. People complained about 10% inflation. Imagine if it were 40%. Russia under Vladimir Putin's regime can never be a friend. They seek vassals or partners to team up against the United States. Supporting Ukraine to oppose them is a good strategy, in my opinion. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.